Is it the terrible news or what? Bad news is the last thing we want. Yes, we are currently receiving a lot of negative news. Yes, I am aware. Aaron returned today. He simply stopped by to let me know that he would never be returning. Richard Rawlings made fun of Jesse James by selling his old kid's bike on stage after firing 2 employees for simply taking a picture with a sick fan. The team began leaving one by one after that joke went too far. With flashy cars and boisterous auctions, Richard attempted to keep the show going, but it no longer felt authentic. Allow us to demonstrate the day that Jesse delivered a truckload of horse manure to Gas Monkey's front door. The walls begin to crumble as the bearded man leaves. Aaron was the heartbeat, the wiring, the bones, even though Richard Rawlings was the face. After he left, the garage didn't simply look different. It had a distinct tone, cleaner and quieter, but also empty. Silence like that only occurs when something significant is absent. However, it broke and was never fixed. This will remain then. All right. Additionally, I have a general understanding of the form and function of this. Yes. I'm copying it over here. We may even cut and utilize one of the other deck lids. Target-ish, almost. No, a full-time convertible. It was hardly a stormy departure for Aaron. Like a carpenter who discovered the home was constructed on sand, he vanished. For months, people murmured. Was there something in the walls, the cars, or the cameras? He was sick of being a character, according to some. Others claimed that he was crushed by the hours. Perhaps it was both. Or perhaps the story was hidden from view. A machine-loving guy didn't want to be a part of one. It was like a TV factory in the garage. Faster shots, faster build-up. For a close-up, cars rolled out polished after going in half dead. There was drama planned. Arguments were practiced. There were no suggested deadlines. They were directives. However, actual constructors don't follow timers. Aaron's goal was to create monsters rather than mascots. Then the fan base was awakened by the moment. You know what's going on, or does he wish to raise? But cool, I'm thinking. I have to share this Street Outlaws story with you. They are currently racing everyone in the nation. He wants to challenge us to a straight-up street race, I guess. Yes, the next project is that. What are your thoughts about that? With a picture instead of a crash. Jordan and Tom, 2 familiar faces, posed with a fan. Just a man. A kind gesture, a memory, a big smile, a breathing machine in hand, and one of Richard's prize automobiles. Kindness, however, required specific guidelines. When Richard viewed the photo, he lost it. He didn't merely speak louder, he let the hammer fall. Jordan and Tom were not there. Not that day, not next week, nor in a month, dismissed due to a fan photo. At first the crew didn't think it was true. The audience didn't either. However, the shop appeared differently when the credits rolled. No more of that old grime, new faces and polished grins. The old team disappeared, one by one. A few went out in silence. Some people uttered their words aloud. And some were, well, shoved. The shop lost more than just mechanics. It lost its scent, its memory, and its spark. Oh my God, Aaron's gone. The place is going to fail and you're going to lose and it's going to be over with, are some of the critics. The autos were built by all of us. It is unfortunate that he has made the decision to go, but everyone must go their own path. We have lost a man. Not that we're failing. There were rumors that Richard still had a stake in the locations where the exiles went, even after the firings. A portion of his money was buried in the foundation, while they constructed something new. Was it under control? Did it involve guilt? Nobody was able to tell. However, the quiet is a condition of the contract if the check clears. Richard made an attempt to change course. New collaborations, fresh concepts, a burger joint here, a merchandise agreement there. However, nothing lasted as long as the early days, when cars were not the only things produced by sweat and teasing. Richard, I've been in business for a while. He will always get off to a great start. I'll begin modestly. Isn't it simply the automobile industry? Tell me how much you can afford to pay me now, and we can work out an arrangement where we both earn money and then leave. Yes, Lightning was the original crew, and Lightning cannot be contained twice. Their brand new store didn't stand out. It didn't have to. It hummed. Each bolt was important. Each weld had a voice. Drama was not what they sought. From the late 1950s until the late 1970s, they created legacies centered on Fords. No flash, no plastic, just muscle, chrome, weight, and roar. Then things became more bizarre. Whispers were heard. Aaron received support from well-known people. Richard himself, perhaps. Is his revival being funded by the same man who dismissed him? Supporters were unsure of what to trust. Silence, however, usually has a signature in this universe. The soul was oozing out like oil from a cracked pan, but the builds continued to come back to Gas Monkey. Fans sensed that something was lacking, despite their attempts at big unveiling, loud launches, and trickery. They tuned out week after week. The link was broken, and that's the real engine. Not because the cars weren't good. His purpose was not to smile for the cameras. He brought a beast, a build that required patience rather than quick fixes. Gas Monkey didn't slow, but it was a car that couldn't be hurried. They took shortcuts, saved time, and the engine sputtered and died when they started it. Jay didn't have to speak. The work was done by his face. Like burnt rubber, disappointment hung in the air. I simply cannot unable to do both here, and we construct so quickly because we build so much. Every moment of my time is consumed with it. Therefore, I firmly believe that the time has come. This was more than a missed opportunity. It served as a warning. There was a stain from the hurry that caught up to them. Absence, not a shouted goodbye or a middle finger exit. The shop lost the man who gave it its edge, its soul, and its craftsmanship. No news release was necessary for fans. They were aware that the heartbeat had ceased. There was still fallout. With their own store, crew, and show, Tom and Jordan made a comeback. As leads, not as sidekicks. Fired Up Garage was serious business. In an unexpected turn of events, Richard's money was still entangled in their wires. It was a response, a retort, and a full-throated "we're still here." Each of their victories placed money in his pocket. Aaron, meanwhile, said nothing. No shouting or drama. He constructed. In his new narrative, each bolt he tightened represented a sentence. A good narrative that didn't require cameras. Not a pedal bike, a roar machine, or anything from childhood. As if it were a joke, put it on stage. The audience chuckled. Richard let out a louder laugh. And the laughing sharpened when it sold for more than $800. It wasn't a sale. It was a dig. A shot. A reminder of the enduring nature of past feuds. They simply embark on a tour. As if things couldn't get much worse, they did. The shade lengthens and the crew divides. The hush that remained after Aaron Kaufman left was not only uncomfortable, but foreboding. The bolts holding Gas Monkey Garage together began to rattle loose one by one. The next dominoes were Jordan Butler and Tom Smith. Not all of them were mechanics. They were attitudes, voices, and faces. They were dumped, not rejected, but they were a part of the pulse, fired silently over a photograph, one of Richard's collection of pictures of a Rolls-Royce next to a sick fan. Although there was no disrespect or harm done, the picture went too far. Fans remarked that there was no prior notification, no farewell episode, simply an absence. The pacing changed, but the show continued. The fresh faces stared at each other. They lacked the same ruggedness, but they were crisp, clean-cut, and camera-friendly. The laughter sounded practiced. Viewers who were aware of the difference began to shy off as the builds appeared hurried. Forums were ablaze with conjecture. Old episodes were dissected like crime scenes in Reddit posts. A fresh show was developing somewhere else, away from the glare of studio lights. Jordan and Tom weren't finished. By no means. Their new name, Fired Up Garage, sounded more like a warning than a resurgence. This spin-off wasn't gentle. It was a proclamation. The construction was dirtier, harsher, and noisier. It was genuine despite its flaws, the sort of gritty stuff that isn't staged. Fans followed out of devotion as much as curiosity. Because Fired Up had the blood, even if Gas Monkey had the name. Fired Up Garage was a business that Richard owned, financially as well as emotionally. Their contracts were still inked by the man who had shown them the way behind the curtain. It might have been a tactic. Perhaps that was ironic. Each episode of their new show, however, put money back into his pocket. They were attempting to get away from more than just the past with him. He was the silent financier who benefited from the uprising. The audience was divided. Was it business or betrayal? It's awesome. It's not rusty after all. It isn't damaged. The tailgate has a dent in it. There is some rusted paint, but mostly the style is 80s fall man. You know, it's just plain awesome. The battery is dead. It appears to be able to run and drive. Aaron, on the other hand, was creating something completely different. Get away from the cameras, the drama, and the noise. He did not retaliate. He didn't record a counter-argument. He simply grabbed a wrench and got to work. His new store was quiet, private, and purposeful. Just construction, no actors, no stunts. Those who could hear a misaligned carburetor from 3 feet away. Ratings were not important to his team. Results were important to them. It was a smaller room. It takes longer. However, all of the cars that were produced were made to last. They had a limited focus. Most Fords are in their late 50s to late 70s. Machines have tails, but not the most expensive or ostentatious. Resurgent American muscle, real steel, real weight, no plastic, no tricks. And they struck hard when the videos appeared without warning. A '69 Fairlane restoration went viral. Just the sound of sanders, welders, and effort, no narration, no jump cuts. Fans loved it because it was honest and unpretentious. Gas Monkey made an effort to adjust. Richard put more effort at getting promoted, more sponsored constructions, and more guest stars. He put the logo on anything with wheels, built restaurants, and conducted auctions. However, the identity of the show became hazy. It was no longer about the builds. It has to do with the brand. And like the team, viewers noticed gradually and subtly, rather than all at once. Another shot over the bow followed. Richard pulled out a surprise during a large public auction. The pedal bike that belongs to Jesse James. It's a children's bike, not a helicopter or a motorbike. Shiny, well-worn, and identifiable. The audience chuckled as he threw it on stage as a joke. The bid exceeded $800. Not everyone laughed, though. It was a comedy to some. It was disrespectful to others. This was salt on an old wound, and Jesse hadn't forgotten the past jabs about his marriage, the remarks about West Coast choppers, or the earlier insults. Yes, this is the Robert Pratke person. He paints really well. He completed the entire chain of events, correct? Every major one. All of it is 18-karat gold leaf. The painter is not from Connecticut. Jesse's response was typical of Jesse. He brought a truckload of horse dung directly to Gas Monkey Garage's front gate. Not metaphorical, not nuanced, not literal. Days passed as the odor persisted. It wasn't an act. It was a declaration. The feud had returned, or perhaps it had never been over. Richard smirked and pressed harder in response. However, followers began to wonder who the joke was actually about. The cracks continued to expand inside Gas Monkey. A rare Dodge Charger, a well-known build, ought to have been a hit. The vehicle of people's dreams. Large, booming, and recognizable. However, the shortcomings became apparent when it was implemented. It was unevenly painted. The trim did not line up. The engine stumbled. It felt incomplete in the daylight, but it looked fine beneath the lights. The comment sections were ablaze with viewers. YouTube was inundated with side-by-side comparisons with previous builds. Everyone was in agreement. The quality had declined. Richard called in a new staff to help him recover. They were hungry, young, and polished. But they didn't have the same responsibility as the originals. They had clean hands. Their media work fills their CV. Additionally, the show began to resemble a recreation of itself. Fast editing, fast automobiles, but no heart. The branding took precedence over the wrenching. Aaron's shop, meantime, continued to grow silently. Results alone, no promos or trailers. Another video appeared, and Phone 100 transformed into a raging beast from a rusting skeleton. Just tools, no interviews. The finish shone, the motor purred, and the video reached 1 million views in just 2 days. Prominent figures in the automotive industry began to pay attention. Interviews were requested by publications. Customers sent questions. For builds, not for publicity. Merch wasn't what they wanted. They want machines. Aaron also delivered. What's going on, everyone? So congratulations if you were among the millions of people that watched the live event the other day when we picked up this vehicle. I'm going to give you a brief education on this for those of you who didn't. Gas Monkey, this vehicle has arrived. You can buy it. Every endeavor was completed with the accuracy of a surgeon and the patience of a clockmaker. Richard wasn't finished, though. He held another auction, larger, louder, and more complex. Memorabilia, rare motorcycles, and vintage autos. Another poke at Jesse was hidden in the middle of the lineup, a beautiful, autographed, framed picture up for sale. There was only a silent smirk behind glass, no mention, no comment. While the crowd applauded, the division grew on the internet. While some grimaced, others chuckled. No one on Jesse's team laughed. Soon after, an official, legal, and unambiguous letter arrived. No more jokes, no games. They would see him in court if he used the name once more. The damage could be seen, but Gas Monkey's PR machine spun quickly. Once a symbol of speed, innovation, and defiance, the brand had devolved into a parody. Hollow but loud. Busy but unable to concentrate. Aaron didn't bring it up either. He didn't have to. Something heavy replaced the noise as it subsided. The fade to black, the echo, the auction. Richard Rawlings was doing more than just throwing an event. By the time the third auction came around, he was attempting to remain relevant. Crowds continued to be drawn by the gas monkey name. Flashbulbs were still lit. However, something softer had begun to settle beneath the noise. A sort of exhaustion. From the deed itself, not from the builds or the engines. Richard sold more than simply automobiles. Memories were what he was selling. Legacy sales. Promoting the notion that everything was still as lively and boisterous as it had been. Even he was aware of this, though. This time, neither a rare import nor a muscle automobile was the big price item. It wasn't a machine at all. The bike was a pedal. The antique bike of Jesse James, reintroduced into the public eye like an old joke that has been told too much. The last time, it made people laugh. It earned stares this time. Perplexed, intrigued, and a little resentful. Richard, smiling as usual, stood by it. He waved and joked. "It's a collector's item," he said. But there was desperation behind the gleam. A chrome-dressed rehashed joke. The audience continued to applaud, clap, and bid. The cheering wasn't loud, though. It was courteous. That's what remained. The change. The sound level had dropped. In the room, not in the microphones. The insanity of the gas monkeys used to be infectious. It was being contained now. This was not the expansion of an empire. One plateauing occurred. And the future was beginning to take shape outside in smaller stores, with fewer lighting. It had been weeks since Aaron Kaufman last posted. There were only a few blurry photos of slick overalls, and partially finished dashboards, no interviews or teasers. Still, the buzz was growing. Word of mouth, shareable videos, no packaging, just evidence. It seemed like rebellion, but not the ostentatious sort. What Aaron was doing. Not the kind you advertise with a line of t-shirts. It was earned and quiet. That is, the kind of resistance that is not overt. It just manifests as outcomes. Aaron was constructing the future chapter, bolt by bolt, while Richard was selling off the past. Fans, particularly the older ones, were able to distinguish between the two. I don't think so, you know. We have been building automobiles, and I have been wanting to accomplish some things for a long time. We have been quite busy. I absolutely want to go in a new route, and I simply can't here. I am unable to do both. And we construct so quickly because we build so much. Every moment of my time is consumed with it. Therefore, I firmly believe that the time has come. Marketing took over the world of gas monkeys. The web page was modified. The amount of merchandise increased. Instead of being difficulties, cars became photo ops. Deadlines become more stringent. Builds become less bold but noisier. Additionally, the audience was not paying as much attention as they formerly did. They were taking a quick look. Loyal fandom gave way to casual opinions. There was a change. Although it wasn't spoken aloud, the comments conveyed the tale. Do you recall when the focus of this show was the builds? The previous crew is missed. This seems rushed. Richard felt it and knew, but he didn't say anything. Jordan and Tom continued to churn back at Fired Up Garage, consistent but not perfect or faultless. Their fans stuck with them even if their show didn't draw as many viewers. The level of engagement was tremendous. They had rougher, slower builds. To be honest, though, they were believed. They weren't actors. They were construction workers. And each scrape and ding contributed to the story. Compared to the highlights of Gas Monkeys, even their errors felt more genuine. For his part, Jesse James had once again fallen silent. No interviews, no manure trucks. However, he didn't hold back on a single clip podcast appearance. According to him, some people brand rather than build. Some people perform rather than work. He omitted names. He was not required to. The audience was aware. Richard also heard it. Regardless of whether he acknowledged it, Richard sought to recenter himself behind his own boundaries. He brought back some well-known designs and selected a few legacy builds. For ideas, he even rewatched previous episodes. The beat, however, was different. The crew had changed. The chemistry was no longer there. There was no fire, but there were still sparks. The new hires weren't hungry, but they were polished and skilled at what they did. They had no bond. They weren't a team, they were staff. The early crew had lost the unseen thread that bound them together like soldiers in a trench. Aaron, however, had begun to mentor others. Word got out, but not formally. Younger builders were arriving, sometimes to assist, sometimes merely to observe. People who wanted skills, the kind that you can't fake with a close-up of a solid edit, rather than celebrity, were drawn to his shop. As usual, Aaron also refrained from posing for selfies. He gave them tools, demonstrated how to feel tension in a frame by touch, and shown how to listen to an engine by ear. There is no trend for that kind of wisdom. However, it endures. Then, almost inaudibly, something occurred that nobody anticipated. An avid collector. The type of buyer who typically signed checks with 6 zeros and went public with compliments rather than a purchase. He had accepted the arrival of an ancient Thunderbird that Aaron's crew had completely repaired. The best machine I've touched in 20 years, he said. Just thankfulness, no cameras, no contract. Aaron's wait list abruptly tripled. Richard took note. He was always aware. He called and discussed working together, and possibly getting back together for a short while. This one would require a great deal of cab penetration before it would come and, remove so much footbox that it would sit back in a somewhat normal location. With 2 and 3, I'll be about at the center line. However, since the motor isn't very hefty, everything will be all right. However, we are a project of nostalgia. Just for fun, one build. No scripts, no show, just the good old days. Aaron remained silent. A speech could never express what the silence did. One last stunt attracted national notice. The measure was intended to honor a veteran and was a charity bill. Its public location, sincere aim, and high-stakes deadline were all intended to evoke strong feelings. Richard activated the spotlight, called in famous builders, and tugged every rope. It was a beautiful automobile. The moment of delivery made news. However, as the cheering subsided, a more subdued response emerged. The response was varied on the internet. While some commended the effort, others pointed out a recurring theme. Although it appeared giving, it felt staged, because viewers can still distinguish between deliberate theater and actual service. Regardless of how glossy the paint is, or how heartfelt the speech is, Aaron continued to develop in his shop. One more Ford, one more Camaro. Some people never left the garage, just to remind you. They simply shut the door behind them and went to work. He didn't require music for his videos, only torque, only strain, timely. The vehicles pulled out. Word got out, and the legend spread. Richard continues to appear, continues to post, continue to grin in pictures. The name Gas Monkey still has meaning. However, its meaning has changed over time. It is an echo, a symbol, and a brand. And for a brief time, echoes are loud. Things that are built slowly, attentively, and without shortcuts are the ones that last. And Aaron had known that all along. Why is Richard still speaking if Aaron's silence spoke louder than words? For more stories where the sparks never lie, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe.